Welcome back, Kristina. We have another minute or two. People are gathering. That's all good.
And hopefully we can make this an exciting topic for everyone. I know it doesn't always sound that exciting to talk about the oral microbiome, to talk about your oral health and the health of your dental environment, but it can be really helpful for your overall health. And for me, it's something that is exciting, just how intricate the entire microbiome is, how integrated everything is, and how all these little connected details that are almost like spiritual in a sense. So for me, it is exciting, and I hope that I can convey that, or we can convey that.
Sure. And I think we can do pieces to make that happen and help. You know, I'm going to talk a little bit about COVID-19, how it all starts in us, and as most of us now appreciate and know. I mean, it's entry through our so-called T-zone, the eyes and the nose and the mouth, and the oral is certainly the nose and the mouth and the throat. Okay, and so that's the lead into the body. And, you know, I think we're very well understanding now, and most people, when they get the virus, it enters through there. And it takes 3 to 4 days to kind of enhance itself and build up there. And then it transfers on down to the lungs and the other epithelial surfaces, which we now know includes not just the lungs, but it also, you know, the entryway to the lungs, the windpipe, but also the stomach, duodenum, and even the area around the rectum, because those are all epithelial surfaces. So first of all, starting right at your lips, and the same happens in your nostrils, we've got a single layer of epithelium. Mm-hmm. So it's called columnar epithelium, but that's why things are well absorbed in the mouth.
Right.
And it's also probably why, you know, Dr. Curatola, we're going to talk about, he already has antioxidants in his toothpaste. Mm-hmm. Because those are well absorbed in the mouth, same as we use B12 in the mouth. One of the first ones I think we used in the mouth was nitroglycerin under the tongue, still used today, the sprays under the tongue of nitroglycerin and those sorts of issues, because that single layer of epithelium is really well absorbed into the body, quick access. And that single layer of epithelium is very protective to us, but it's also where there's a synergy, there's a team of bacteria grow there. So we'll try and get into that part. So welcome everyone. We've kind of been doing a bit of a prelude of what we're going to talk about today. I welcome everyone. People have been very good about following up, and I would ask you to please share this with people you want to share it with, either active live or during or after. Of course, these are left on Facebook Live, and we also, for those that aren't on Facebook, fair enough, all my siblings are not on Facebook, and so fair enough. So I've made them aware that they can go to drbillcode.com and download those from the blog portion, which is, you know, within the website. So there's getting to be a collection there. I put on some of the podcasts that I've done over Point of Return, and of course the ones that Kristina and I've done, and the ones I did with Dean Howcroft from Australia. Hello, Dean. I don't know if you're up yet, because it's only around 6 o'clock in the morning over in Australia. Tomorrow, of course. So today we wanted to focus on a few things about COVID-19. I mean, the numbers are climbing. We're starting to get to a stage where people are saying, in some countries, Spain, Italy, and others, when can we start to change things? Mm-hmm. I know Austria has now added, you can go now, I think, for shopping for children's clothing, you can go to hardware stores, and you can go to home do-it-yourself fix-it type stores. And so that's a change. Austria did a very good job. They had it quite a bit early. They didn't have very many deaths because I think they did some good planning and organization. And they're starting to decide what they should do in Italy and Spain. Now they're ahead of us, probably maybe a month ahead of us in Canada, because we're not as far developed. I mean, the US has gone through a huge boost and increase in recent days. And so I think they're starting to think, and as you've probably seen, they're discussing back and forth, you know, who should do this? The states, federal government. I mean, that's a problem they'll solve on their own. But the East Coast is trying to cooperate with the West Coast and make everything work. So the piece that we need to think about is what can we do to improve our own personal chances? And that's why we're trying to talk about things that make a real difference that you can do for yourself. Most of you are doing home quarantining, and all of these are useful steps. The day will come, though, that we're going to go back into the community. Some of us may have members, family members that are already in the community because of essential services they provide. A big one, of course, is the healthcare workers. My personal dream and hope is that the healthcare workers will be the first group and that they will start to look at them. This doesn't include me, by the way, even though I'm a former healthcare worker as an anesthesiologist. It doesn't include me in this group, but I very much regard and respect what they're doing. But wouldn't it be brilliant if they could know, do they have antibodies that have developed the COVID virus? And so then they would know they're not at risk for their family. They would also know that they're less at risk for the people that they're caring for.
Exactly.
And we could focus particularly on that very important select group first. Because I realize, the ability to measure these things is always deliberated by the amount of kits that they've got to do it and the amount of cost that they've got to do it. But I think there's a lot of people working on antibody testing now. And so I think that's one of the things we'll see next, because we don't know. After you have it, COVID-19, do you get antibodies within a month? And how long do they last? So that's getting tested in long-term studies. My hope is that you get immunity for months, maybe even years. I mean, we know chickenpox gives you almost lifelong when you get chickenpox. That's a virus, of course.
But then with the flu, we see different strains every year, and so we don't necessarily get immunity against the flu every year. So we want to know what it's going to be like.
The flu is a different group. The closest virus we have to this is probably SARS, because that was COVID-1, and this is in some corners called COVID-2. So that's probably our best example, and we know that they get some degree of immunity, and we probably haven't worked out how long.
Right.
So
we have one question from Sebastian. He's asking, who are you, Kristina? I missed the beginning. There's no bio on the page. Sorry about that. My name's Kristina Mitts. I am a clinical nutritionist. I work with Dr. Code out of our clinic, Taymount, Canada. I have additional training to do with the microbiome. I've also trained under Glenn and Enid Taylor in the UK in fecal transplantation.
Sure. Yeah, and so my bad, I should have brought that up again. And, just to complete the piece, my background, I initially did 4 years of general practice or family practice back in the early 80s, then a specialty in anesthesiology, and did my boards in Canada and the United States, because in Canada, curiously enough, we do at least 6 months training in intensive care. So this is particularly of interest to me. And of course, as many of you may or may not know, intensive care to a great degree started in Toronto as an offshoot partly of the polio epidemic, because people had the inability to breathe. Some of the first ventilators were the so-called iron lungs, where you're breathing inside a tube instead of a tube going in you, which had its pluses and minuses. And then out of that, anesthesia has still been a big piece of intensive care within Canada. A little bit less so in the United States, but intensivists often come from pulmonology or pulmonary expertise. Sometimes they come from surgery, and sometimes they come from anesthesiology. So that's kind of a mixture of group, and everybody's honing their skills much better. As most of you know, there's a ventilator. There's often an elevator in a hospital too, but there's a ventilator on an anesthesia machine, because that's how we breathe for people if they happen to not be breathing for themselves during an anesthetic. I wanted to bring just an interesting thing, because we had a good question the other day with regard to the pulse oximeter. So we have a pulse oximeter again with us today. It's like one of the important guys that wrote what to do when you go to a cardiac arrest, check your own pulse. But anyway, we're going to run our own pulse oximeter. And one of the good questions the other day was, what about the pulse oximeter that's on my phone? I think that individual was talking about a Samsung 10. I did some research since, because I wasn't very up on this. And they have had one. They've tended to pull it back now. It was not quite as accurate. This sort of one, which is the more regular one, which you can purchase online, pulse oximeter, is about plus or minus 2%. So it reads oxygen saturation. So if you read it at 96, then it could be 94, it could be 98. The ones that were on the phones, the smartphones, were plus or minus 4%. And then there was a secondary angst in some countries, was this a medical device? And so it didn't happen as much. So I think, those would be ideal. The other is a much rougher guideline because plus or minus 4% is starting to get into a gray zone for you. So to move on from that, I wanted to talk just a little bit about, of course, the nasal prongs. We've showed you before. These are the ones we saw in the emergency room. They've been on in the emergency TV and all these places. That's what people are used to. That will improve the oxygen you're breathing. If you've got oxygen flowing through that tube at, say, 2 to 3, up to 5 liters a minute. They can do exceptional cases. They put in 50 liters a minute. That's like being in a wind tunnel, at least. But anyway, that has shown to often help people get through the very tough phase. So in hospitals, I think primarily they're using the nasal prongs, and then they go to the non-rebreathing mask, which this represents. And if that fits well, and you've got 5 liters a minute running through it, you can get up to nearly 70% oxygen. And then the next step, and this is what I understand from circuits that Mr. Boris Johnson, who's the Prime Minister, of course, of the United Kingdom, is what he was on, one like this. And of course, this is what goes over my head. These are the tubes, inlet, outlet. Colors doesn't matter, it's just to show that. And then I would put this on and put this over top of it. Okay. So I look like a spaceman.
You do look like
I probably sound like a spaceman too. But by using that for, I think, 48 hours or so in the intensive care unit, the pulse oximeter, they can get many more people through the very tough cases without a ventilator. Because ventilators are fraught with problems. I think we all know. And ventilators, have their own injury, their own problems. And intensivists are very good at deciding who needs it and who doesn't, because they've got downsides or side effects in using them that injure people. So after that little sidelight, I think we should get into the oral microbiome. So as we alluded to a little bit in the start, Kristina and I wanted to focus on the oral microbiome today because it's where the virus starts in us. It gets, so this is on a delay, right?
Yeah, there's a delay.
Okay. As long as I realize that. So it enters typically through the mucous membranes in the mouth, the nose, and even potentially in the eyes. Okay? So that's one thing to think about. Mask doesn't protect your eyes hardly ever. That's why some people use these visors. They look like a bicycle helmet, or we might use them for mowing the grass when we're worried about things coming up into our eyes or our face. They're the same things. That's what our local laboratories, when they're drawing blood, that's what they've got on for protection. Because as soon as you do a venipuncture, of course, you've got a significant amount of spray of blood particles.
Right.
So that's why these face masks are probably better. They haven't caught on very much. We happen to have one from our lawn mowing, so I guess we could use that as an option. So if we can get the oral microbiome, which is that layer of cells inside the entire mouth, the throat, and the nose, if we can get that microbiome itself very healthy, everything is better. So we're going to talk a bit about that today from a dentist perspective, because my favorite book on it currently is The Mouth-Body Connection by Jerry Curatola. He's a biologic dentist in New York, and I heard him on a Zoom meeting that it was at, which was Integrative Medicine Forum, and he did a great job. And since then, read his book and had a look at it. He talks very well about it. So I've known for a long time dentistry is really important. And it's not an accident that chapter 2 in my book is about dentistry. I didn't focus enough on the microbiome in retrospect because many parts of that were written more than 2 years ago. But I do know now that the microbiome is exquisitely important also in the mouth. So in the mouth, we talk about 600 billion organisms. Those are a big variety. There's several hundred different ones within that. There's a few nasties, but we want all of the good ones because they keep the not so good ones down.
Right. So in the same way as when we were speaking to the gut microbiome, there's also this environmental piece as well. You don't want to just think about the germs or the bacteria. You want to think about their terrain as well. And so one of the things we mentioned as being a part of the terrain is a healthy pH. So acidity versus alkalinity. And the pH of the mouth happens to be a little more neutral than some of the other areas of the body. So this would be something to consider.
And so within that pH, it's partly a version of which organisms are there and which are dominant. Nearly 70% of people in North America have a problem with their gum disease, periodontitis, which are somewhat the same thing, because it really matters. Mm-hmm. We know that a healthy set of teeth adds 8 years to life. So mm-hmm. that's as big as everything else. Stopping smoking, that gets you 8 years. So now if you quit smoking, a healthy microbiome, boom, you're up, potentially up to 16 years better. A corollary of that is the things that are very negatively impact the microbiome, smoking, alcohol, and certain other things that we take, soda pop and all those other versions of the same, because that hugely affects the acidity and makes more dramatic. The other thing, and this is on kind of new ground for many of you, the biologic dentists will be all over this. But many of our dentists have been living in days of yore a little bit and haven't talked enough about the microbiome, and they're still believing in the scorched earth policy. So the scorched earth, for those of you who don't remember that policy, it was used during the First and/or Second World War. When an army was retreating, they would burn all the crops in the area that the new army was coming into. So they had no food. Well, the scorched earth policy in the mouth has been the dominant thing for 40 years. Mm-hmm. Probably because in the last couple of years, I've gone away from toothpaste. I bought a recent, high-end model of a toothbrush. And the guy wisely said, I don't use toothpaste with this. Almost all of our toothpastes have something in them that kill bacteria and do the scorched earth policy. So that was fluoride, that was variations of, tea tree oil, triclosan. Triclosan's in almost all the commercial toothpaste.
Exactly, and the chlorhexidine mouthwashes.
Yeah, and all of these are a huge scorched earth policy. Triclosan was withdrawn in 2016 as an antibacterial hand wash, because that recognized that it injured the microbiome and injured your mental health, among other things. Why we left it in toothpaste? Beyond me, but we got to get it out of toothpaste. Mm-hmm. There was a time, and I used some myself, 10, 15 years ago, Colgate had one called Total.
Yep.
Well, that meant total elimination of the microbiome.
Exactly.
But the downside of that is the negative or nasty pathogen type bacteria, they become dominant faster than the normal ones.
Yeah. Well, you might wipe out some of the pathogens to start with, but you're going to wipe out everything, and to expect that the good bacteria are going to be the ones to come back, it just doesn't always work like that.
Yeah. So that's why with several years of work, Dr. Jerry Caratola, put together his toothpaste, and they market it now. It's called Revitin, and we'll be putting a link on so you can go and look for that. He did a good job in the book. He did a homemade that you can make yourself. I mean, the Revitin is interesting because he put antioxidants in it. Mm-hmm. He put in coenzyme Q10, vitamin C, and so other features that would help not be a negative on the microbiome. So everything would be healthier. So I hadn't thought about that, but it makes a great deal of sense to have some coenzyme Q10 and some vitamin C in the mouth, because you've got some of those not so good reactions occurring, and you will have an excess of oxidation and free radicals. So if you can counteract that right at the beginning, then the good guys are going to get more established, and they create a layer, and then often a layer on them. And now the body can deal much better with the pathogens. Included in that group of pathogens would be a virus called COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So if we can get that all healthier, we may get inoculated and get the illness, but it will be a lot calmer and diminished. So folks are already putting in, some questions already. We encourage you to get questions, and we will do our best to answer them. If I don't answer them on screen today, I'll try to get them next time, so you can see on in the interim, to the Facebook site that you're on, and we'll try and deal with them. So to reiterate again, so that's why we're working with the microbiome today. The other thing Dr. Curatola put together was a mouthwash, a homemade mouthwash. Mm-hmm. Now, you've been really creative. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about mouthwash?
Okay, so I have got a DIY mouthwash. So one of the ingredients that Dr. Curatola loves for the oral microbiome health is green tea. So I've put together, actually based on someone else's recipe. It's not my recipe at all. It's from askthedentist.com, but I liked it because it incorporated the green tea and some of the other things that Dr. Curatola likes. So it's a green tea mouthwash. So I've got 1 cup of water. I have 1 teaspoon of sifted matcha powder, which is a green tea. I have half a teaspoon of calcium carbonate, which is something you can just purchase online. You can go to bulk supplements. So I've added 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda and a half tablespoon of xylitol. And then you just keep it in the fridge. You give it a shake in the morning before you use it.
I think I'm supposed to try this.
He's supposed to try it.
So swish it around my mouth.
Yep, swish it around and then spit it out.
Because this isn't a mouthwash you're supposed to swallow. So
no.
As a kid growing up, the mouthwash that we often had, we couldn't afford Scope, but we did often have Listerine, okay? Both of those are scorched earth policy. I mean, Listerine, 65% alcohol. And as a consequence, it's not a bad thing to use for hand washing, so you don't have to pitch it out. You can use it for your hand cleansing in moments you can't get to soap and water. Fair enough. And move to something else other than. So remember, this is a mouthwash, not a toothpaste, because we wouldn't be using, ideally, sodium bicarbonate to brush our teeth with, because it's like sandblasting the teeth correspondingly. Okay, so we'll give it a go. So that's pretty good, actually.
Good.
I'll give you a full point. Not harsh to use, and not a problem. And I like green tea, so that all works out well. So the pieces that we want to take out of that is multiple. Why do we use mouthwash? I think we use it for halitosis or bad breath. Mm-hmm. But if we take that back a step to the bad breath, then all of a sudden we realize if we get the microbiome healthy, we probably won't need the mouthwash.
Exactly, yeah.
So it'll save us a step. So in the interim, but you can make some. And as I said, we're going to list Dr. Curatola's and the 6 or 8 other toothpaste that he regards as pretty reasonable, which are all commercial, so everybody can pick their own choice among that. Or if you want to be creative, much as you've done with making this, they can make their toothpaste at home. In the interim, use water, and even no toothpaste. Mm-hmm. No toothpaste is probably better than the modern toothpaste.
Mm-hmm. Even the natural toothpaste brands, actually no, it was the mouthwash I was looking at the other day. So I went into the grocery store, I'm looking at the Jason mouthwash. It has polysorbate 80 in it. Polysorbate 80, not good for the microbiome. So, I mean, even these natural brands of mouthwashes aren't all that great.
I remember back from the days when we were making creams based on emu oil, polysorbate 80 was used as an emulsifier. Mm-hmm. It made everything mix and stick together. That doesn't mean it's healthy for you. It just means it worked well for the people preparing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We do have a question from Sebastian. He's asking, can COVID penetrate through the ears?
Can COVID penetrate the ear? Probably not. The exception would be you're unlucky and have perforated eardrum, then it can certainly get into that, because the inside of the eardrum, as you're probably aware, connects to the back of the throat, the so-called eustachian tube. That's the little tube that has to open and readjust temperatures when you're taking off in a jet plane or going into a hyperbaric chamber or whatever you're doing. So it should not enter through the ears. The exception, again, might be it can't even penetrate through the skin if you've got major breaks in the skin from a nasty eczema. So if you've got an otitis externa, nasty eczema in and around the ears, or even on the skin surface, it potentially can enter there. But the dominant place by far, somewhat the eyes, but big time in the nose and the mouth.
Okay.
Good question.
Dan Hudson wants to know, what exactly do you use for your oral health bill?
So you always have to be prepared to answer that if you're going to preach and talk about it. So I aim to brush at least twice a day, and I do flossing once a day. That's typically what I manage. I see my dentist every 3 to 4 months for a cleaning. I'm more at risk, and I really need to look after my teeth because I've had borderline tooth health ever since I was a kid. I had a huge number of amalgam fillings, which we'll talk about again in a minute. I had them all out about the year after I was diagnosed with MS. And one of my mentors of today, and that would be Dr. Bill Shaw at Great Plains Labs, he feels that was maybe one reason of my recovery improvement trajectory with my multiple sclerosis. So it got aggravated because by the time I was about 27 or 28, I was in family practice. I was having problems with memory and everything else. I was diagnosed as depressed, and I was put on a tricyclic antidepressant called imipramine, which is a powerful anticholinergic, meaning it drives the living daylights out of your mouth. Okay? That's a big problem because now your teeth and all your gum disease will be much worse. So many medications do that, and I want you to look at that within your own personal thing. Talk about them with your dentist and doctor, because you've got to adjust those if you're going to adjust them with everybody on the same team and on the same page. Sometimes you can't do it, but sometimes there's other alternatives to reduce that drying problem. If you've got the drying problem, lots of sips of water, lots of things to try and relieve it. Sugar-free gum will all help the saliva. So I eventually, after almost 20 years, got off the imipramine with the help of the protocols and concepts of pointofreturn.com. And so that helped my liquid saliva some, because saliva is your best friend in the mouth. It helps with digestion. It helps you take something like beets and turn it into nitric oxide, which is a very powerful thing for lowering blood pressure and everything else. But at the same time, it really makes a difference to how everything can work together. Where was I headed with that, Chief?
I'm not sure, but I know there are some additional pieces to the salivation as well that's beneficial. So it's going to bring circulation and nutrients to the area, and it's also going to take away waste. So it's going to take away microbial waste as well. So that's an important piece.
And the other part is there's bacteria within the saliva.
Yeah.
They're called planktonic. So if you think of your images of the ocean with the tiny plankton, but those bacteria that live in the saliva, and those tend to be on the good team and helping the whole thing throughout the mouth. And it's a great mixer because we've got several kind of micro habitats or micro ecosystems within the mouth. I mean, you've got the tongue as one, you've got the gums as another, you got the teeth themselves as another, and then you've got the hard palate at the top and the soft palate at the back. Mm-hmm. So each of those are their own microsystem, small subset of systems, and they each have a kind of an optimal set of bacteria working together. And if they are working together, you can really improve things. I mean, he gave examples in his book, Dr. Curatola. If you have the microbiome healthy, for example, his Revitin toothpaste mixture, even the rough side of the inside of the mouth, which happens in chemotherapy, because these are fast dividing cells, so they take quite a hit from the chemotherapy. Often he can help people heal their mouth up. So that really matters. So I think let's take it just another step further and talk about things that irritate it. And one of them would be metals, right? Mm-hmm. Heavy metals. First of all, ideally, you would not have a mercury amalgam. So mercury amalgam filling is about 50% mercury, and the other components are things like tin and so on. They're banned now in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. Exactly. I mean, those are smart people. They've done some great studies on things, but they ban mercury fillings.
And the WHO has even proposed that the U.S. needs to start phasing out use of amalgams as well, but yeah, we'll see how that goes.
So, well, it'll take some time. And I got one of the best responses I ever expected from a dentist, because he said, why are they so kind of slow to phase them out and say that there's a problem with this mercury? He gave me the best answer. It was, nobody in dental practice wants to be part of a class action suit. That made a lot of dollars and sense to me. And so I think that's one of the rate limiting steps. But that doesn't limit you as an individual for having them looked after. Because mercury in the body, and I had a dominant amount of it, I still got a fair amount because it's really hard to get it all out. You're not going to get it all out, frankly, but I want to keep it under control, because we know that mercury, and I mentioned Dr. Mark Houston's study in my book, is a terrible thing for injuring the entire blood vessel circulation in the body. Atherosclerosis triggered by heavy metals, especially mercury, is a dominant problem. So it's a very good one to get out. And you don't want to get it out casually. It's not something you can do at home. But you want to ideally go to a biologic dentist. And the details are in Dr. Curatola's book. So if you've got mercury, I'd purchase a copy. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on his website, Curatola, Curatola, because you want to be using the rubber dam. You want to be on a few things ahead of time to help control and deal with the mercury when it comes out, because you don't want to make the dentist or the dental hygienist assistant or you unwell by the process. And if you do these things carefully, you can get through most of these steps pretty well.
Mm-hmm. And they should be able to check afterwards as well. They should do a couple more x-rays and just make sure that there are definitely no leftover flecks of mercury in your mouth.
And because they show up really well in x-ray. Mm-hmm. So that's one advantage of mercury. It's easy to find on x-ray. And so while we're talking about metals, it's worth even extending a little further. We've been doing implants for probably 30, 40 years now. So this is where you've had to have a tooth out, you just couldn't rescue it, and so now they will put in a bolt or a screw in, and then they'll put an implant on top of it. Initially, they were mostly done in titanium, and now the favored way to go is ceramics, because titanium itself has its own relative problems in the body. We're learning this over time because we used to put in an awful lot of titanium shoulders, hips, and knees. But over time, these seem to shave off somewhat, and they cause irritation and problems in the body. And the body creates its own localized microbiome or biofilm around these implants, and they're a high risk for infection. So it's become protocol now. Anybody with a joint replacement, certainly in the first 2 years, if they're going to have dental surgery or other surgery that involves, a lot of bacterial shed, then they put them on antibiotics for 24 hours or whatever ahead of time to counteract that problem. Because if you get an infected titanium or other artificial joint, usually you can't solve it until you take the joint out. Because foreign bodies attract bacteria, and it's usually the negative ones that you can't get rid of. Things like Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, worse yet, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus, and all those relevant problems.
Exactly. And then for me, working with our clients on their microbiome and digestive health, it's not even a question. If you have amalgams in your mouth, you're going to see the mercury drain into the body, into the gut. It's going to impact that balance of your microbiome. It's going to throw that off. You're going to end up seeing an increase of pathogens, a decrease in diversity. You may even start to see an increase in antibiotic resistant microbes, which is a big problem. And then we've also come across some studies that have shown that it impacts your bile secretion as well. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and so just to go on with that a moment, we recognize now that mercury, every time you chew and you have mercury amalgams in your mouth, you get a fine shredding of gas, and you get the so there's a fabulous YouTube video, I think you'd call it smoking teeth, and it looks like, because when people chew, there's this gas given off, and you can see this in the video, in the film, and it's pretty shaky. I mean, it's pretty warning to us that maybe we should do something about this. So there's no good reason to have them put in anywhere. I mean, they've now got non-BPA resins and other resins that they can use in the body for dental caries. And it used to be a shortcut, even in the early days when we put it in children. Well, we'll just put amalgams in these kids' teeth because they're going to lose these teeth anyway. Nonsense. Not a good idea. Kids are much more prone to these problems even than an adult because they can't detoxify as well. Mm-hmm. It's a challenge for small kids.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, we have a couple questions. So from Roger, when is the best time to floss, AM or PM, before or after brushing?
Well, most people suggest do it before brushing because then you're going to get a little better access and you're going to get these components moved out of the teeth. As long as you can make it a routine, it isn't a crisis whether you do it morning or afternoon, because the plaque builds up in 24, 48, 72 hours. So that's the advantage of daily, because your brush will not get to those spots in between the teeth. I mean, it just won't. Some of us have got a big gap. I mean, I have a decent sized gap and maybe in my upper teeth, but lots of my teeth are quite close together, and that's a place where plaque builds up. Plaque isn't always bad. That first layer on healthy teeth with ordinary healthy bacteria and the other combination is actually a protective layer. And we've often got into this idea that all biofilms were negative. No, when that first layer is on there as a biofilm, it's actually officially under plaque. So some phases of plaque are okay, but it's when they get overly thick and now they've got negative, nasty pathogenic type bacteria as part of them, now they're a problem. Because the biofilm is the body's ordinary system of communication and a teamed up of bacteria, and the biofilm difference will be dramatic between those microhabitats, the soft and hard palate, the teeth, the gums, and the tongue. So those are the big ones. So short story is, please make it a routine. I'm open, morning or evening, whatever works best for you.
I'd also love to add just another piece to the dental flossing, and I'm not going to demo this for you. We already demoed the mouthwash, but with your dental flossing, it's not just a quick in and out with the dental floss. You really want to work it in and work it. Say if you're in between two teeth, work it towards one side first and then floss right in the gums there, work it to the other side, floss, because you're not just removing stuck food in there, you're also you're kind of increasing circulation to the area and thus reducing inflammation.
Yeah. And if they bleed, well, hopefully they'll heal up and they won't bleed hardly at all.
Yeah.
So it's a walking the line, but it's a brilliant investment that you can do. I need to keep doing it. The one advantage in the last 5 years of doing a lot of hyperbaric oxygen, my teeth health has improved too. Almost all of those nasty bacteria that are pathogenic are anaerobic, meaning that they can take glucose or some other sugar and they can turn it into energy without oxygen. Oxygen kills them, okay? But looking after your teeth is exquisitely important. I'm really aware of it. I don't have enough bone left with my severe osteoporosis to do an implant. So I better look after the ones I've got left.
Exactly. We have another question from Bruce, who is asking, how do we increase our IgA levels as a barrier in the mouth and nose?
Well, the IgA is an immunoglobulin which is common in the digestive tract. So it's a very good question. And it happens when your own body is producing these things in combination with the healthy bacteria. So that will raise the IgA amount within the body. Some of us have a deficiency of IgA. That's less common, and that's partly nutritionally based. But in general, the body does a very good job of producing that. It doesn't get produced hardly at all if you've got the scorched earth policy. So you need that synergy back and forth between the healthy bacteria of your mouth or your own personal microbiome, along with your own cells in that lining layer, epithelium, in the gums, in the tongue, and even throughout the entire mouth. Because the IgA is one of the body's protective components to deal with outside invaders. And so that's why it's a brilliant question, because we don't usually talk about IgA as much.
Yeah, I definitely can appreciate that question. It's something that comes up a lot working on the digestive health piece, because the IgA, what it does in your gut is it helps to coat some of the things that are moving through your gut so that your immune system doesn't react to anything and everything. So it's definitely an important piece to your gut health and to your immunity. But really, the key is balancing that entire microbiome. So that's the answer. I know it's not a simple one, but that's really the key.
What are we doing?
You answered type versus ceramic, so preference is ceramic. I had to get my dental implant out in January after 3 years. Bone graft to fill the hole. Should I try again with ceramic or just leave it? I was at 47, so a bridge is not possible. Wisdom teeth are already taken out.
Yeah, so let's deal with the question. So if you're able to heal that area up, and so some people have great success because if you do extra oxygen, like the hyperbaric oxygen, it often allows that injured or bone recreating area to heal up normally. Woe are you if you happen to be on one of the medications which triggers osteonecrosis in the body. And those are the ones to treat osteoporosis, some of them, unfortunately, because the bone formed, especially in the jaw, is not normal. So those are probably best avoided if you're able to. I think there's other ways to approach your osteoporosis. And so if you've got teeth health already, problems and jaw problems, which you've talked about, then likely over a period of months and years, by recreating the mouth microbiome optimally and hopefully your entire microbiome, then all of these things will allow you to health, and then you could go again with a new implant. So you're going to have to do it in a team with your physician or your healthcare provider and your dentist and your own efforts. Admittedly, almost all the efforts are on you and me. Mm-hmm. We do our own to our own best benefit because our healthcare professionals, they're not only there once every months or weeks or even 6 months or a year. So we need to do all the legwork effort ourselves, the regular brushing, flossing, so on.
Yeah, we have a retired dentist on here. So Bruce says, I would say leave the space as long as the opposing 7, i.e. 17, is making contact with the lower 6, so it cannot super erupt. Great.
Okay, thank you.
Roger says, my B12 injections for ME seem to help stop my gingivitis. Dentist in Puerto Vallarta, trained in the US, told me B12 can do that.
So B12 is a really important vitamin in the general microbiome health, and a healthy microbiome increases B12 production because it's produced in the lower part of the small intestine, okay? That's where B12 comes from. But B12 is exquisitely important in the healing issues. So the B12 is one of the important B vitamins for optimal healing within the mouth and so on. So they were correct. They made a good point. And that's why, just in summary, I would like everybody to be on a multivitamin, multi-mineral regularly, especially in this time of crisis. But I think it's a good idea for almost all of us because every year, every time we measure the soil minerals and so on, they've depressed. At the same time, as we've used a lot of weed sprays and especially glyphosate, the soil microbiome has deteriorated, so the vitamins that are available in plants grown in that same soil are diminished. So we run that risk. And then the only other thing to comment on, you especially need B12 in some form or another if you're a rigid vegan, because we don't get enough B12 without that. And so that's one, you better look at supplementing it. It sometimes works taken orally, but to improve that, some people use it in a mouth, sublingual, under the tongue sort of idea, or as you stated already, Roger, injectable. And my preference for injectable B12, if you're going to do that, if you can, use either the hydroxy or methylcobalamin. I like those better than the cyanocobalamin.
Exactly. And then one more piece we haven't touched on yet is the stress oral microbiome connection. So there are actually studies showing that those with chronically elevated cortisol have higher incidence of dental caries or gum disease. So definitely anything you can do to help manage your stress and lower those cortisol levels is going to be really helpful for you. There also happens to be a distinct connection between the oral microbiome, your stress levels, and your circadian rhythm. So people doing shift work are definitely going to have a harder time with this, as your circadian rhythms are going to be thrown off. But definitely you want to try and create or mimic as close to the real circadian rhythm as possible. So expose yourself to natural sunlight as often as you can, especially first thing in the morning. That's when your cortisol should be highest, and that's when it does raise in response to that natural light. And then towards the evening or whenever you go to bed, you want to see those cortisol levels lower, and so you want to be exposed to less blue light. So less of the blues from your computer, less watching TV. Try to have a nighttime routine for yourself where you go to bed, you read a book, and use red lighting if you can, if you know about that.
And most of us can take our computer or our phones and put it onto another lighting system. Ideally, you would minimize your screen time, before you go to bed for an hour or two. And the other thing in there is talked about a little bit about before, but now that we're all home and everybody's around and everybody's on their computer or their smartphone, you want to try and diminish, at least while you're sleeping, is your electromagnetic radiation. Okay, so turn off your Wi-Fi at night, please. Get rid of your hands-free phones. All the phones in our house are corded phones for a reason, because each of these impact on us and our healing ability within the body, and they become another additional stress. So control those stresses if you can. And, Kristina mentioned well about the issue of cortisol's rising, and that's even shown in children, more caries, and in adults. So anything now that you're a family gathered together in your home quarantine situation, keep the stress down. That time, that walking outside or time spent on, the balcony, whatever your access possibilities are, and give everybody a little training in 4-7-8 breathing, which we've talked about before. That's originally described by Dr. Andrew Weil when I took my integrative medicine training from him. And I mentioned it in the book, major part of the book from another colleague done on mindfulness meditation. In each of these pieces, or yoga, any of these pieces down stress help the entire body heal better, and it improves the microbiome. And not to forget, exercise. Healthy, regular exercise, even 20 minutes, 3 times a week, kind of as a minimum, maybe with interval training. But do some exercise, because exercise calms the body. It enhances the parasympathetic and brings down the overdrive or hypersympathetic that most of us tend to live in, and so on. So the more we can calm those features, the better job we'll do of reducing our stress, improving our microbiome. And remember, we tried to focus on today on the oral microbiome. That's where your body meets the COVID-19 virus first. So the better shape it's in, the better it will tolerate against viruses starting into it, or maybe not aggravating it as much and getting into the lungs to cause the lung crisis.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd love to touch on the ability of those microbes from your oral microbiome to translocate to other areas of the body. So we see that those microbes can end up in systemic circulation. They can bring with them LPS, which is lipopolysaccharide, which increases our inflammation, predisposes you to vascular disease and all sorts of other issues. So some of the ways you can reduce that translocation, at least from the mouth to the gut, would be through working on your stomach acid production. So using something like apple cider vinegar or lemon water or bitters to increase your stomach acid production, as well as the enzymes and bile production. So maybe you want to touch a little bit on the LPS.
So LPS is lipopolysaccharide, okay? And there's two kind of major groups of bacteria. Most of the ones we talk about in the microbiome that are in the anaerobic portion, meaning they can live without oxygen, are gram-negative. And LPS is when those gram-negative bacteria die, because they don't live very long. They've got a very short life cycle measured in probably days or even less, okay? When they die, part of their membrane becomes these little chunks of lipopolysaccharide. And these are extremely critical around the body. Lipopolysaccharide raises inflammation throughout the body. So it's been labeled and found, and you can trace the origin often of rheumatoid arthritis, even back to changes in the microbiome. If you can see the changes of atherosclerosis and hardening of the arteries and all those other features, they can grow when they take those plaques within them. They can culture the same organisms that are in the mouth in a negative time when you've got gum disease and so on. So they're incredibly linked. And that's why healthy teeth and a healthy mouth microbiome will reduce your heart attack, stroke, hypertension, and the whole gamut. It all fits together. And remember, those are big deals when you get into the problem of COVID-19. If you have those accompanying diseases, you're more at risk of a main trouble or problem with it. The other one that's been interesting lately, and I learned it, so, I know I'm kind of stretching you. I've talked about Prevotella and previous as an organism, and I've talked about C. diff. Most of us know C. diff. C. diff stands for Clostridium difficile. Well, today I'm going to talk about one S, because that's the long first name, Noxia. Noxia. So S. Noxia is found in the mouth of anybody with poor teeth or poor dental hygiene and therefore a poor oral microbiome. The strong association with it now, because it's nearly 1%, which is the highest of any ordinary bacteria within the mouth, often up to 1% of all the bacteria in the mouth, but it's a predictor of obesity, especially in women. So the day is coming when we are starting to establish concept. If we can improve the microbiome, then we will improve someone's ability to reverse the weight gain problem that many of them struggle with. So this is something you can do in the comfort, ease of your own home right now in your home quarantine. Work on getting those mouth microbiome healthy. Probably pitch out your toothpaste as it is currently. You might have to pitch out your mouthwash, but we can look on that. We're going to put links on so that you can see what these optimal toothpaste might be. We'll put on the recipe of how you could make one at home, or in the interim, quit using toothpaste until you get one that's better for you than that does not trigger that scorched earth policy.
Yeah, that's a really great suggestion, or multiple suggestions. We have one question from Roger. Any suggestions about fungal infections like in the fingernails, toenails, and the relation to the microbiomes? Yes, we see a lot of that. There's definitely a relationship to the microbiome. I would say that fungal overgrowth is really a downstream symptom of general imbalance, including the microbiome and potentially other things as well. It's kind of a big topic. I think we would need an entire hour to cover it, but maybe you have some quick suggestions.
Well, sure, because by the time it turns up in your fingernails, toenails, or vagina, it's already dominant in your gut. I would suggest that over 90%, and probably over 95%, of the fungi that are in your body are in the gut already. So that's why people notice after they do a course of antibiotics for whatever reason, now all of a sudden they've got vaginal overgrowth or the others. Or sometimes they've got, it's showing up on the skin. It lingers a long time, but it can be treated, and the place to start treated is normalize the microbiome in the gut. And that's why often with the care of a physician or an integrative physician or a naturopath, you may be able to go on something that helps reduce that fungal overgrowth in the gut. And this can be as complex as something called biocidin, or it can be mycostatin or nystatin, which are the same product. It was often used for thrush in the mouth, but now we know that it's virtually not absorbed into the body, but it does dramatically reduce the fungi that's having an overgrowth season in the gut. Normal to have some fungi in the gut. We just don't want an overgrowth of a single one, because then it becomes so-called pathogenic.
And before you go so far as taking the prescription antifungals, make sure you've taken care of the terrain as well. So address your diet, make sure you've reduced sugar in the diet. Maybe try taking some digestive enzymes to make sure that you're breaking down carbohydrates properly and not leaving them to putrefy in the gut. And then potentially look into the heavy metals piece, because Candida is known to proliferate in a metal-rich environment.
Yeah. So there's a series of things. So I think that gets us pretty close to our hour today. So we talked a bit about it. So I think on Thursday, we're going to try do our relative update on COVID-19, how that will try in. It's a question of microbiome, what you might do as an ultimate choice if you can't seem to get it settled down, and that's gut flora transplant. So we'll address kind of a summary of the microbiome as it applies especially directly to COVID-19 on Thursday. In 2 days' time, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Once again, we welcome your questions. Send those in, and we'll do our very best to address them.
Maybe just one more question here about the B12. It's hard to get the other B12 forms, and the shelf life seems to be shorter. Suggestions?
It probably is. So if you get the other ones, you're going to need more of the cyanocobalamin. It's not as effective, but it is much more available. And if economics is a problem, then I would go there with a reasonable amount. It's pretty easy to get depleted in B12, and the other part of the methylation pathway is B6 and folate. So my preference there is methylfolate as opposed to folic acid. Folic acid, unfortunately, has to go through several steps in the body before it can be made into methylfolate. And so it's much better if you can. Like I take a multivitamin, multimineral, which has a methylfolate in it. And I take a magnesium at bedtime, which has a methylfolate in it. Because I'm one of those probably 1 in 4 people that are heterozygous, meaning I've got some methyl problems and I can help those. And at one point, we'll probably do a discussion on methyl groups, because it's very topical these days. Not everybody can just boost B6, B12, and folate. Some of us have to be much more careful, in particular, because we get into a being of unwell from over supplying certain of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did we want to address that question about the Lyme today, or leave it for Thursday?
Well, we can leave it primarily for Thursday. Well, short story is, I accept Lyme. It is a real problem. It's been a co-problem of many of my patients. That's one reason I had Dr. Karen Johnson wrote a chapter in my book, Solving the Brain Puzzle, because she addressed the problems of chronic Lyme under the Shoemaker protocol and did a very good job on that. It's a very topical thing. I'm sure the day will come where we'll need to address, fungi more directly and occasional significant mycotoxins and all those issues. So we'll lead into parts of that and lead into parts of the issue on Lyme. Because the folks with Lyme, of course, with many months and or years of antibiotics, have a big crisis in repairing their microbiome. Mm-hmm. So it fits in well. So we'll do more to address it on Thursday.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so for now, thank you guys so much for watching. We will post links to everything that we mentioned. And again, if you can share this video, that would be really great.
And if people aren't on Facebook, let them know. And I'm sure you've got a few friends that are not. Then they can go to the website and they can still watch the same entity, albeit stored after the fact. Just go on to drbillcode.com, click the blog section, and you're in.